Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Coffee and Tea with AARP Connecticut. This bi-weekly virtual conversation series features AARP staff and volunteers, as well as decision makers in Connecticut and beyond. In our conversation, we discuss a variety of topics affecting Connecticut's older residents. Today, we're joined by AARP Connecticut Volunteer State President Tia Murphy and Burt Cohen, Staff Attorney and Broadband Policy Coordinator for the State of Connecticut Office of the Consumer Counsel. This morning, we're going to discuss high-speed internet and broadband policy and what's happening with that policy at both the state and federal level. So let me start off with introducing Tia Murphy, and Tia is our volunteer state president. So Tia, why don't you tell us a little bit about what your role is as volunteer state president and what your background is, where you're from, and a little bit more about yourself.
Sure. I live in Bethel, Connecticut. I have been the volunteer state president for AARP for the last 5 years. And I came to working with AARP after I had taken care of my father until he passed, after my mom died and my husband died. So I had a lot of experience in older people and providing care. And this was a perfect opportunity for me to get involved. In my role as state president, I represent all of our volunteers. We have about 160 plus in active volunteers in the state of Connecticut. We go out, we do advocacy work, we educate, we do peer education. We are involved in a lot of different issues that affect the 50 plus population, which, oh, by the way, then of course helps the rest of the population as well, as we like to say, from 8 to 80 and everything before and after. So that's pretty much what I do.
Excellent, Tia. Well, thank you for your volunteer service, and our team is a really good one, and that's partially because they're led by you and the great work that you do. So let me turn it over to Burt Cohen. And Burt, so you're a staff attorney in the Office of Consumer Counsel and Broadband Policy Coordinator. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what the Office of Consumer Counsel is and what exactly your function is in that office. And if you want to tell us a little bit about your background as well.
Sure. Thank you, John. And thank you so much for inviting me here today to join you. And I just want to hold up my mug since we're doing coffee and tea. Connecticut AARP has been a tremendous resource and ally as we've been working together, John, over the last year and a half to close the digital divide, particularly as it impacts over 30% of Connecticut's seniors. So the Office of Consumer Counsel is established by statute, and we advocate the interests of consumers on utility matters. The utilities are the electric companies, the gas companies, water companies, and also cable and telecommunications services providers. So within the law that establishes the OCC, there is an Office of State Broadband. And the Office of State Broadband is charged with working to facilitate the availability of high-speed internet service to every state resident and to increase access and the adoption of broadband service. I'm a staff attorney, as you mentioned, and in that capacity also serve as the Broadband Policy Coordinator. Prior to joining the OCC, I was in private practice for over 30 years. And my specialty was cable and telecommunications law. So it kind of all came together here at the OCC working with you, John.
And that's great. So it sounds like with your background, they really came up with the right person to take on that role. And so you said you've been there for about a year and a half, right?
Year and a half, right
Excellent.
At the beginning of the pandemic, right when the need for internet access for everybody just became so apparent.
So we're just starting, we're coming out here in the end of the year in December, and I know we have a new head of the Office of Consumer Counsel, and tell us a little bit about who that is, if you don't mind.
That will be Claire Coleman, who is going to be a tremendous resource for our office and for the consumers of the state of Connecticut. Claire currently serves as the Undersecretary for Legal Affairs at the Office of Policy and Management. And she has worked with AARP and our office, as well as other state agencies in the governor's office, obviously, on legislative issues involving energy and broadband. So she's well-versed in the topic that we're going to be discussing today.
That's great. And I know both myself and AARP volunteers not only worked with Claire in the office of the governor, but we also worked with her in her previous life on utilities issues when she was working as an activist then. And so we have a great relationship, and we're really looking forward to continuing that. We're be sure to have Claire on as a guest in the new year. So that's great. So it's a very important office. And as I said, we work very closely with it. But you mentioned, high-speed internet, and, but we also mentioned things that the office deals with. But there are a lot of things that the regulators don't have a role in, and you advocate mostly also before legislators. So why don't you tell us, when it comes to, say, high-speed internet, what role do regulators have, or what role don't they have when it comes to high-speed internet, broadband, and cable usage? You could test the fact that's one of the things right here we get a lot of questions about.
Yeah,
That is,
our
go ahead,
members.
Tia.
No, I was just going to say, one of the things that, you brought up a great point, which was at the beginning of the pandemic, all of a sudden everything was shifting to online. So we had a lot of people who are new to the internet and are new to a lot of this technology. And I think it was surprising to some people how much or how little high-speed access they actually had. And I think a lot of people were very surprised as they'd be on a Zoom call and all of a sudden it would be saying, insufficient internet access, and people would be like, that's really shocking. How did that happen? I thought it was good. So this whole area of broadband is something we're all learning about firsthand, as well as from what the different aspects are from consumer policy and what your role is in all of this.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about that, Burt, because Tia brings up some really good points that the public really doesn't understand kind of the ins and outs of how this all works, because we're used to the old model of utilities and cable and broadband providers aren't utilities, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, and Tia's point is right on. So there are rules and regulations regarding cable and telecom services. And in Connecticut, these rules are overly deregulated. Let me rephrase it. They're overly deregulatory. And there's little appetite on the part of regulators to dedicate resources to address these issues, because there'll be legal challenges and they're not always sure that they're going to win those, although I'm pretty confident that we would prevail in most of those. So in any event, broadband is a very complicated issue because it starts at the federal level with the Federal Communications Commission. I'm going to call that the FCC, save all time. So historically, the FCC has had a hands-off approach to internet. Internet's been around, the internet access and residential availability for that has been around for, about 20, 25 years now. But it was a slow process for people to adopt that service. But so historically, again, the FCC took a hands-off approach. They wanted the industry to grow. So during the Obama administration, by then, was becoming more apparent that internet service at levels that were adequate was really important. And so they started to make some changes in establishing some ground rules to protect consumers, to protect the providers who didn't have a lot of money, not the providers, excuse me, the content providers, I should say, not the cable and telecom providers. So to make sure that they were playing by fair rules, To give you an example, we've all heard the phrase net neutrality. Net neutrality was established during this period. And the idea was to make the internet fair so that the big content providers, think Amazon, Netflix, possibly YouTube, that they would pay the cable companies and telecom companies so that they would get priority in terms of the bandwidth and speeds, as opposed to other content providers who didn't have those resources. So the idea of net neutrality was to make everything a little bit more even and fair, in addition to basically protect consumers from providers overly micromanaging our speeds. The FCC under the Trump era changed that. So we went from no regulation to a little regulation, back to no regulation. The key to that, the key reason was the Trump era FCC wanted to get rid of the concept of net neutrality. So they got rid of that rule. So, of course, there was everything that happens at the FCC goes to court afterwards to challenge it, because there's always going to be some unhappy parties. And there were a lot of unhappy parties about this. So, unfortunately, the court did uphold the FCC's decision to rescind net neutrality. But, and this is an important but, what they did was they said that they left the door open for state level regulations, saying, hey, FCC, you're not going to regulate. Well, the states have the right to protect consumers. And remember how, think about how utilities operate, particularly cable and telecom. Where are their facilities? They're on our public streets and highways.
Right.
Okay, so we should have the ability to have some reasonable oversight for safety and consumer protection. We acknowledge totally that we don't have, the law is pretty clear that we have no rate regulation abilities at the state level, but we certainly have the right to protect consumers, to make sure that the services are adequate, reliable, and safe.
That's a good kind of overview. And people really just don't sometimes understand, how complicated this is, and that, state regulators just can't wave a wand and make these folks do what they want to do. And it's complicated, but we work with you and others to try to get as much of a handle on this as we can. So let's shift gears for just a minute. So one of the things, and I know, Tia, you can attest to the fact that we hear often is, particularly now with the pandemic, right, and needing to have these high-speed internet services for all kinds of things. And Tia could talk about the things that we people need it for, but cost is a fact. So, Tia, why don't you talk about the need and what things we've experienced with regards to high-speed internet, and the reason why, particularly now in the pandemic, it became so prevalent and exposed kind of so many of the areas in which we're inadequate. And then we could talk maybe, Burt, a little bit about some of the benefits that may be out there to help folks.
So, Burt, it's interesting. My background, by the way, is in telecommunications, cable, and internet services. I worked both for telecom, AT&T, Bell South. I worked for an overbuilder in Texas and build out across the state of Texas. And then I worked for a cable company that was introducing phone and internet services on top of their other services across the Midwest. So I sat on the other side of this, and now, so I understand the issue from both sides. But if you look at it, what we hear from our members is that, the internet opens up to them a world of services that they can't really get any other way. I mean, talk about social isolation, any kind of visits for people. It's been critically important for people to be able, if they can't get out or they're because of their health situation, the internet has just been a boon to them. In terms of telemedicine, I have to say, opening those restrictions so that telemedicine could really be much more broadly applied and was covered by various insurance opportunities really made a difference in people's lives. If you think about it, access to information, access to any way of applying for a job. I mean, these days, pretty much a lot of applying for a job, as well as your interview process, all of that takes place over the internet. So this is critically important. And one of the things people don't realize is that a large number of our members are still working, and they're working way longer than they have been in the past. So that ability to be able to access job opportunities and be part of that process is critically important. And then we have a lot of rural folks, and people don't think about Connecticut as being rural, but there's a lot of dirt in between one town or one community and another. And a lot of times the facility operator, the telecom company, the cable company will say, well, it's too expensive to build out to those particular places, but they have as much need as anybody else in the community. So those are some of the issues that I know that are really critically important.
And I mean, I just look at it, Burt. I mean, you and I, we're still working. We have the ability to work from home because of high-speed internet, right? I mean, folks in nursing homes had the ability to get virtual visitation after a lot of work and lobbying by Tia and volunteers at AARP. And all of that wouldn't be possible without the internet. And affordability is just a huge issue. So I know we worked on with you and others to get something called the emergency broadband benefit. So why don't you talk a little bit about what the emergency broadband benefit is, and maybe who qualifies for it and how long that will go. And then we worked as well on getting this Bipartisan Infrastructure Act passed. And we'll talk about a few aspects of that, but there's also a new program that'll be coming up online to help people pay for high-speed internet as well. So tell us what you can about those two issues.
Sure. I'll focus on the emergency broadband benefit and its successor, which was established under the Infrastructure Act, which President Biden recently signed. So the emergency broadband benefit was designed to help low-income people afford access to the internet. And the EBB, we'll call it. Again, to save time, there's a lot of acronyms in this business, as you and Tia know. So the EBB, it was established for a limited duration to get us through the pandemic. And the idea was that the pandemic would be pretty much over right around now, or early 2022. As we know, that may be around a little bit longer than that. So it was established for a limited duration. The idea was to help not only low-income consumers with a subsidy up to $50 a month off of your internet access bill, but also to reach out to people who were of moderate income means, who had lost that income as a result of the pandemic. And so that was established. In addition, it also provides a $100 benefit for a device that is provided by most of the eligible cable telecom providers that have signed on. So that's in place. It's available now.
So Burt, will that continue until the money runs out?
That will continue till the end of December.
Okay, so people can still apply?
You can apply if you can go online, getemergencybroadband.org. That's getemergencybroadband.org. And it's very easy to apply. So I'll talk a little about the eligibility. So the eligibility is, again, you can demonstrate that you lost income during the pandemic. You can demonstrate that your income level is no more than 130% above the poverty level. If you have a resident in the house who's on the school lunch program, that household would also be eligible. So there's a lot of, and there's other eligibility criteria. So it's pretty broad. But that money that was allocated by Congress for that, again, it was on an emergency basis. It was designed to get us through the pandemic. In the Infrastructure Act, the Congress allocated $14.2 billion, which is a tremendous amount of money, to the subsidy. They rebranded it because they wanted to get away from the emergency nature of it. And while it's not a permanent program like Social Security or Medicare, the idea is to get it closer to that. So it's now rebranded as the Affordable Connectivity Program. The benefit under the, again, another acronym, the ACP, is lowered to the ACP as opposed to the EBB. The ACP it's lowered to $30 a month, but again, it goes for a much longer period of time. My estimate is maybe 4 or 5, even more years, depending upon how many people sign up. It adds the SNAP benefits as eligible criteria, and also increases the income eligibility from 135% above the poverty line to 200% above the poverty line. So you can earn a little bit more money and still be eligible. Again, you can still get into this through the getemergencybroadband.org. Right now, Connecticut has over 75,000 households enrolled in EBB. And so many more of our citizens, including our seniors, are eligible for this benefit. And if $30 doesn't sound a lot, truth be told, $30 a month, that fills up your gas tank.
Hey,
buys groceries for a week. Go for it.
For our folks, that's a lot of money, and it's going to be really beneficial, and we're going to have our work cut out for us to make sure we get as many people aware of the, this last month here of December, the old benefit, and get as many people as we can aware of the new benefit. And I just want to commend, that number of 75,000, because that's a tremendous amount of people, and a lot of that's due to the work of our AARP volunteers, but certainly to your efforts in trying to get the word out about the emergency broadband benefit. Thank you to you and Tia and volunteers for all the work you've done.
And John, just as an incentive, if people sign up now, don't wait for January for the new program, because you'll automatically be enrolled if you get in now.
Good.
And you'll get, for 2 months, you'll get the $50 benefit 2 months into the next year. Beyond, while new enrollees in January will get the $30 benefit. So
Excellent.
There's an incentive now. Do it now.
And
Great.
Burt, this is something that they can enroll in online. Is that correct? They don't have to print anything out. If they have internet access and a device to access the internet, they can just fill this out online. It doesn't require any special programs or applications or software, anything of that sort, correct?
That's totally correct, Tia. It's it's like anything else. I mean, you got to answer questions. They're going to ask income questions. But again, if you don't have a device, go to your library.
Right.
Go to your library. Go to your neighbor's house who has a device or apartment, and there is a way you can print it out if you're really uncomfortable with doing all that. There is a way you can print that out and mail it in, but why delay?
But we really should encourage people to do it. So Burt, let's touch on one last thing. So we'll kind of combine two things into one and see if we can just kind of drill down on it. And it's probably relates to a point Tia made about rural areas and lack of connectivity. And so, we have both this federal bipartisan infrastructure act that was signed in November by the president, and it gave us the new benefit for broadband for folks, but it also had other money available, and there was other federal money back from the CARES Act that was available for high-speed internet expansion. And we passed legislation together back earlier in the year at the state level to deal with this. So kind of where are we? What are these bills going to do? What do they address? How will they get to Tia's point about, expanding access to the rural areas and actually getting us access to not only the rural areas, because sometimes it's just as much of a problem in some of the inner cities.
Yep. Yeah, because, it's interesting, Bert. We hear often people will be in a major city like a Bridgeport and say, how come my neighborhood doesn't get it? But I have my friend who's 3 blocks away who gets it. And it's always hard to try and explain this to people. So, yeah, we'd love to hear how is that all going to flow through and get that build out going so that everybody gets access to it, whether you're in a rural area or in an urban area where you just, for some reason, have been skipped.
Sure. Those are great questions. And it really disturbs me that we have areas of our state that have gone unserved this long. It's very disappointing. But having said that, the state has already applied for one grant for the northwest corner of the state. That grant application is pending. We also have some money from the AARP funds that the governor has set aside for some of the unserved areas. But the priority, we're going to get, the state of Connecticut will be eligible for up to $100 million through the Infrastructure Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, as John said. And let's face it, today, there's almost nothing that's ever bipartisan in Congress. So that shows you how important broadband is to this country and its well-being. But in any event, the focus on the priorities under the Infrastructure Act are unserved areas. That's number one. You take care of every unserved area. We will get telecom, cable, broadband facilities down every street in the state, capable of serving every business and every household in the state. Now, having said that, let's talk about some of the other problems. And that's not, the other problems are the places that are underserved, where service is there, but it's not quite up to speed.
Good. It's not very good.
It's not very good, right? And and right now, there's two ways we have to identify what those areas are. So number one is the state of Connecticut in the legislation that, John, that you referred to, that you and I worked on during the last session. There is going to be a granular state broadband map that's going to be hopefully available to the public. So you'll be able to see what is available, what providers are available to you, and what their speeds are. So we have that. And also the FCC is finally going to do is an accurate, or at least a more accurate broadband map. Those are going to help us identify areas between the federal map and the state map that are underserved. Because, listen, it's hard to, we can all say that the speeds need to be higher and people need better service, but until we can have the data that demonstrates that, it's hard to allocate the funding. Funding will be there. That is our priority. The office, like I said at the beginning, the mission of our office is universal service. The governor's broadband bill, as it was passed, requires not just universal service, but in speed, no less than 100 gig. I was going to say 1,000 megabits, a gig service download speed, and 100 megabits per second uploads. So that will help us.
So it sounds like it sounds like we've got funding coming down from the federal government. We've got planning that's going to be happening both from the federal government and the state government, and that we're going to really kind of end that digital divide that we talked about by getting connectivity. We've got benefits that are going to come in to help people afford to pay for that connectivity. And so it seems like there's an awful lot happening. Unfortunately, folks, we've come up on our time, and this is a really important conversation. We'll do it again. But I do want to thank Burt Cohen, staff attorney in the Connecticut Office of Consumer Counsel, state's broadband policy coordinator. Burt, anything quick closing remarks?
Yeah, finally, there's going to be some funding also to help us with what we call digital literacy, knowing how to use the internet for the needs, for your personal needs. And we're going to have money. We're going to develop a plan. We're going to work on that. And that's particularly important for seniors
and that's important for us, Burt. And we're actually going to be and putting that in our legislative packet next year and making that a priority. So we appreciate all that you do in the Office of Broadband and Technology. I want to thank Tia Murphy, our state president. Tia, any quick closing remarks?
I just want to say thank you, Burt, for your efforts and for helping make this clear to people just what is happening, and that there are things that are going forward, and to give us all a little bit of hope that things do look brighter for our future. So thank you for all the work that you do. And I know we'll be talking again.
I'm sure we will. And thank you, Tia and John.
No, thank you, Burt. We appreciate it. And appreciate the Office of Consumer Counsel. Appreciate all the AARP volunteers led by Tia. And I'd like to thank all of you for joining us this morning for another edition of Coffee and Tea with AARP Connecticut. So take care, everybody, and thank you.